The stars whispered secrets of ancient civilizations, of empires that had risen and fallen long before the first sentient being ever gazed up at the night sky. Across the galactic expanse, 1,000 species thrived, each with their own history, their own wars, and their own myths. Among them, one legend stood apart, a story passed down through generations, whispered in darkened chambers and half-forgotten libraries. The humans, a race so destructive, so unrelenting in their conquests, that the elder species had purged all records of their existence. Some claimed they had wiped themselves out in an apocalyptic war. Others believed they had fled beyond the known galaxies, vanishing into the void. And yet their memory remained, a ghostly warning of what unchecked ambition could unleash. For centuries, the stories faded into obscurity. The great empires dismissed them as mere fables, cautionary tales to frighten fledgling civilizations. After all, if such creatures had ever existed, they were long gone. Until the day the fleet arrived. The dominion of Raral had ruled uncontested for thousands of years. Their empire spanned hundreds of systems, their fleets unmatched, their technology centuries ahead of their rivals. When their deep space sensors picked up an anomaly on the fringes of their territory, they assumed it was some lost colony ship or a band of pirates foolish enough to test their might. They sent a single dreadnought, expecting swift extermination. The crew of the Vashka laughed when they saw the primitive vessels, ships of crude metal shaped by brutal efficiency rather than elegance. They were old, relics of a forgotten era, their hulls scarred from countless battles. The Raral hailed them with the arrogance of a species that had never known fear. The response came in a language the Dominion had long erased from their archives: "We are humanity. Surrender or be destroyed." Admiral Varkos sneered. It was impossible. The humans were myths, extinct. Yet as his sensors analyzed the approaching fleet, an uneasy feeling coiled in his gut. These ships, old as they were, moved with precision. Their weapons were charged, their formations flawless. He dismissed the fear. The Raral had crushed countless foes before. With a single command, he ordered the annihilation of the human fleet. That was his last mistake. The human ships accelerated faster than they had any right to. They weaved through incoming fire like wraiths, dodging plasma blasts with eerie precision. Their weapons, outdated by Dominion standards, should have been laughably ineffective. But they weren't. The first Raral ship went dark in seconds, its shields overloaded by a barrage of kinetic slugs. Another erupted in flames as a missile, ancient yet devastating, pierced its core. The dreadnought, the pride of the Dominion fleet, barely had time to send a distress signal before its bridge was torn apart by railgun fire. The battle lasted less than an hour. The humans didn't lose a single ship. Word spread like wildfire. The impossible had happened. The myths were real. The monsters had returned, and they were coming. The Dominion scrambled, sending more ships, larger fleets, entire armadas. It didn't matter. The humans fought like demons, with a brutality and cunning that defied logic. They used tactics the Dominion had never encountered, strategies born from a history of war unlike any other. They didn't seek diplomacy. They didn't ask for terms. They wanted revenge for crimes forgotten by time, for the sins of the past, for the galaxy that had once tried to erase them. And so, as the stars burned and entire worlds trembled in fear, one message echoed across the cosmos, carried by the wreckage of every Dominion fleet that dared to stand against them: humanity has returned. The Dominion of Raral, once the undisputed rulers of the galaxy, now found themselves gripped by an unfamiliar and terrifying sensation: fear. Reports poured in from every corner of their empire, each one worse than the last. Entire fleets had been wiped out, colonies reduced to ashes, and their once unchallenged dominion was crumbling under the relentless onslaught of an enemy they had long dismissed as myth. At the heart of the Dominion, Supreme Chancellor Varkos stood in his grand war chamber, surrounded by his highest-ranking commanders. Holograms flickered before them, each displaying the same grim reality: human warships striking like phantoms, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. "This is impossible," Admiral Tanek muttered, his mandibles clicking in frustration. "These creatures are relics of the past. Their technology is ancient, their ships crude. How are they winning? Varkos turned to his intelligence officer, a pale-skinned Veril named Selin, whose trembling hands betrayed her fear. What do we know about them? He demanded. Selin hesitated. Not much. All records of the humans were purged long ago. What little remains suggests that they were resilient, warlike, but this, she gestured at the destruction before them. This is beyond anything we could have imagined. Perhaps they were never truly gone, another general murmured. Perhaps they have been waiting, watching, preparing for this very moment. The words sent a chill through the room. The idea that humanity had not vanished but had instead been lurking in the void, building their strength, was more terrifying than any war machine. Enough speculation, Varkos snapped. How do we stop them? Silence. Because no one had an answer. The war was unlike anything the Dominion had ever faced. They had fought countless enemies before, rebellious planets, rival empires, pirate factions. But those foes had played by the same rules, following the same unspoken laws of engagement. The humans did not. They fought without honor, striking without warning. They refused to negotiate, refused to acknowledge surrender. They targeted the Dominion's supply lines, their shipyards, their fuel reserves. They were waging total war, something the Dominion had never encountered. And worst of all, they seemed to be getting stronger. The first human fleet had been small, but new warships were appearing every day. Where were they coming from? How had they built so many ships in secret? The Dominion's spies had no answers, and that only deepened the terror. And then humanity did something truly horrifying. They took their first planet. The Dominion had assumed that humans were nothing more than raiders, striking quickly before vanishing. But when the industrial world of Koros 9 fell, it became clear humanity wasn't just here for revenge. They were here to conquer. Survivors from the planet told stories of human soldiers unlike any the Dominion had seen. They fought in exosuits, moved like shadows, and never left a single Dominion soldier alive. The cities of Koros 9 burned for weeks, and when the fires died, the human flag was raised over the ruins. A new empire was rising, and the galaxy would never be the same. Panic spread like wildfire through the Dominion. Koros 9 was the first world to fall, but it would not be the last. Reports flooded in. Human fleets were striking deep into Dominion space, taking planets with terrifying efficiency. Worlds that had stood under the Dominion's rule for centuries now burned with human fire. Supreme Chancellor Varkos could no longer afford to ignore the truth. Humanity wasn't just winning, they were dismantling the Dominion piece by piece. He called for an emergency meeting of the High Council, a gathering of the most powerful beings in the Empire. The council chamber, usually a place of control and order, was now filled with fear and desperation. We must deploy our Omega-class warships, Admiral Torsnek argued. Their fleet is powerful, but they cannot match the raw might of our capital ships. We've already sent Omega-class ships, Selin countered, her voice trembling. They were destroyed. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the room. How? Varkos growled. Selin took a deep breath. We've underestimated them. Their ships may be old, but their technology has evolved in ways we never anticipated. Their weapons bypass our shielding systems. Their tactics are unlike anything we've faced. What do they want? One of the council members demanded. Selin hesitated before responding. Vengeance. Silence. Then the room erupted in shouts. This is madness. We are the Dominion. Negotiate with them. Surely they can be reasoned with. No. They will not stop until we are extinct. Varkos raised a hand, silencing them. His reptilian eyes gleamed with fury. If it is vengeance they seek, then we will show them why the Dominion has ruled this galaxy for 1,000 years. We will burn their worlds, hunt them to the last soldier. But even as he spoke, the words felt hollow. He knew the truth. The Dominion had always won because they had always been stronger. But for the first time, they were facing an enemy that was not afraid. For humanity, this war was not about conquest or power. It was something deeper, something more terrifying. It was personal. And deep in the void, beyond the reaches of known space, A new fleet was assembling. Humanity had returned, and they were just getting started. The Dominion's war machine roared to life. Across the Empire, shipyards worked without rest, churning out warships faster than ever before. Recruitment centers overflowed as soldiers were pressed into service, their minds filled with propaganda about the Terran invaders. The Dominion had faced rebellions, rogue fleets, and rival empires before, but never an enemy like this. And still the humans advanced. The war was not fought on even terms. The Dominion believed in control, in discipline, in strategies that had worked for millennia. The humans fought with chaos, with unpredictability, with an unrelenting brutality that shattered every doctrine the Dominion had built its empire upon. A single human fleet could appear out of nowhere, hit a supply convoy, and disappear before the Dominion even had time to react. Their ships were not just fast. They moved like predators, striking vital targets with precision. They didn't waste time in drawn-out engagements. They struck where it hurt the most. And then came the ground war. When the Dominion lost Koros 9, they assumed it was an anomaly. When they lost Kethro 6 and Dral Prime in the same week, they realized it was a pattern. Human soldiers were unlike anything the Dominion had ever encountered. The Raral, like many species in the galaxy, relied on advanced drones and automated warfare to minimize their own casualties. Their soldiers were commanders, guiding machines to fight on their behalf. But humans, they were different. They fought in the mud, in the ruins, in the streets. They didn't rely on machines to fight for them. They were the weapons. Dominion troops, accustomed to clean, calculated warfare, were horrified. Human soldiers did not break when outnumbered. They did not surrender when surrounded. They fought with an intensity that defied reason, with tactics that made no sense until they worked. The worst were the Terran shock troopers. They didn't just kill Dominion soldiers, they hunted them. They adapted, learned, and exploited weaknesses faster than any enemy the Dominion had faced. A single Dominion battalion could be wiped out in a night by a handful of human operatives. Their weapons, primitive by Dominion standards, fired kinetic projectiles that tore through armor like paper. They fought without mercy, and that terrified the Dominion more than anything. The humans weren't just conquering planets, they were taking them back. The Dominion's leadership scrambled to understand why. They were the dominant force in the galaxy. They had ruled unchallenged for centuries. What had they done to deserve this war? Then they found the truth. Deep in the restricted archives of the Dominion, buried under centuries of classified information, Supreme Chancellor Varkos uncovered a dark secret. The humans had not vanished from history, they had been erased. Long ago, before the Dominion had risen to power, their ancestors had encountered humanity. A young, ambitious race expanding rapidly, forging alliances and mastering warfare faster than any species before them. They were a threat, not because they were evil, but because they were relentless. And so the Dominion's forebears had made a decision. They had committed genocide. They had exterminated entire human worlds, burned colonies to the ground, and wiped every record of their existence. They had hunted the survivors to the edges of the galaxy, believing they had destroyed them all. But they hadn't. Somehow, humanity had survived. And now, after centuries in the shadows, they had returned, not as conquerors, but as executioners. The realization struck Supreme Chancellor Varkos like a death knell. The war wasn't a war, it was a reckoning. The humans weren't here to expand, to conquer, or to dominate. They were here to settle an ancient debt, one written in blood and fire, one that the Dominion had forgotten but humanity had never forgiven. Varkos stood in the silent chamber, staring at the ancient records, at the holos of burning human cities, at the cold, calculated extermination of an entire species. The faces of the Raral leaders from centuries past looked down at him, their decisions sealing the fate of their descendants. The humans had every right to hate them. And yet hate wasn't the word for what the humans felt. Hate was emotional. Hate could be reasoned with. This was something else. This was retribution. A sudden chime broke the heavy silence. An emergency transmission flickered to life in the war chamber. The face of Admiral Tanek appeared, his expression a mask of disbelief and barely restrained panic. They are here, he said, his voice hollow. Varkos straightened. Way. Tanek swallowed. Here. On Raral Prime. A hush fell over the room. Impossible. The humans were still on the outer colonies. They shouldn't have been able to reach the Dominion's capital so quickly. But they had. A second alarm blared. Tactical maps filled the war chamber, showing red markers descending from the void like vengeful wraiths. Human warships, larger and deadlier than the Dominion had anticipated, had bypassed the outer defenses completely. They weren't here to fight another battle. They were here to end the war. The skies over Raral Prime turned to fire as the first human dropships descended through the atmosphere. Anti-air defenses roared to life, but it was already too late. The humans had planned this assault with the precision of a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of war. Stealth craft had already infiltrated the planet's orbital stations, taking control of defense platforms and turning them against their own fleet. Dominion warships were exploding in low orbit, raining molten debris onto their own cities. On the ground, panic erupted. Citizens flooded the streets, watching in horror as their once invincible empire collapsed before their eyes. The Dominion's own soldiers, those who had been raised to believe in their species' superiority, now trembled as human strike teams emerged from the smoke. They fought like demons. The Dominion had never seen warfare like this. Relentless, brutal, efficient. Humans didn't waste time with theatrics. They struck vital infrastructure first, crippling power grids, communications, and military coordination. Within hours, entire districts were plunged into darkness. Varkos stood in his war room, watching the nightmare unfold. His admirals screamed at one another, issuing desperate, conflicting orders. It didn't matter. The Dominion was losing. No, humanity had already won. He had one last option. Prepare the planetary annihilation protocol, he said, his voice calm. The room froze. Even his most loyal generals recoiled. Chancellor, Selin whispered. That will kill billions, our own people. If we cannot have this world, neither will they, Varkos said coldly. But before the order could be given, the doors to the war chamber burst open. A figure stepped inside, flanked by two human soldiers clad in jet-black armor. Varkos recognized him instantly. He had seen the man's face before, not in person, but in the old, buried archives. One of the last survivors. A descendant of the massacred race. A human. The man walked forward, his helmet under one arm, his eyes filled with something worse than hatred, certainty. Varkos clenched his jaw. What do you want? The human smiled. Justice. Outside, the Dominion burned. Raral Prime fell in a single night. For centuries, the Dominion had ruled the galaxy with an iron grip, its fleets unmatched, its power unquestioned. But in the end, none of that mattered. Humanity had not come as conquerors or diplomats. They had come as executioners, delivering a long-overdue sentence. The war did not end with negotiations or peace treaties. It ended with silence. By dawn, the Dominion's high command was gone. Supreme Chancellor Varkos, his admirals, his war ministers, all executed. The humans did not spare them, did not offer mercy, did not waste words. The judgment had been passed centuries ago. This was merely the sentence being carried out. The streets of Raral Prime were eerily quiet after the final battle. The towering spires of the Dominion's once great capital stood in ruins, smoke rising from shattered buildings. The banners of the Raral, once a symbol of power, lay trampled in the dirt. And over the tallest tower, the flag of humanity flew. Across the galaxy, every Dominion-controlled planet received the same transmission. A human commander stood before the camera, clad in dark, battle-worn armor. His face was calm, his voice steady. There was no joy in his words, only finality. The Dominion is no more, he said. Your leaders are dead. Your fleets are gone. Your empire has fallen. A heavy pause. For centuries, you ruled through fear. You erased our history. You tried to erase us. And yet here we stand. He leaned forward, his gaze burning into the lens. Humanity does not forget. Humanity does not forgive. But we do understand justice. The screen flickered, showing images of surrendered Dominion soldiers being led away in chains. The humans had not wiped them out. Not completely. Those who had not resisted, those who had no hand in the genocide, would be spared. But they would never rule again. We do not seek to replace you, the commander continued. We are not here to build an empire. We have reclaimed what was stolen from us. Nothing more. The galaxy is free from Dominion tyranny. What happens next is up to you. The transmission ended, and with it, an era. The Dominion's collapse sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Worlds that had been under its rule for centuries found themselves free for the first time. Some rejoiced. Others fell into chaos. Rival species scrambled to fill the power vacuum, but none dared to challenge the humans. Because now the galaxy knew the truth. Humanity had survived extinction. They had endured in the darkness, growing stronger, waiting for their moment. And when that moment came, they had not sought conquest or dominion. They had sought justice. The stars still whispered secrets, but now they told a different story. They spoke of a species that could not be broken, could not be erased, could not be forgotten. They spoke of humanity's return, not as conquerors, but as a reminder that some debts can never be forgiven, and some crimes can never be forgotten. The galaxy would remember this lesson. And in the depths of space, humanity watched and waited, guardians of a justice that transcended time itself. The age of the Dominion was over. The age of reckoning had begun. The galaxy would remember this lesson. And in the depths of space, humanity watched and waited, guardians of a justice that transcended time itself. The age of the Dominion was over. The age of reckoning had begun. 5 years after the fall of Raral Prime, the galaxy had settled into an uneasy peace. The former Dominion worlds struggled to govern themselves, some forming loose confederations, others descending into civil war. Trade routes that had been stable for centuries now ran through contested space, and pirates grew bold in the absence of the Dominion's iron fist. But none dared venture too far into the unknown regions where humanity had retreated. The humans had vanished as suddenly as they had appeared, leaving behind only their monuments of vengeance. Burned Dominion fleets drifting in the void like metallic graveyards. Occasionally, explorers would stumble upon human outposts, silent installations tucked away in asteroid belts or hidden on the dark sides of moons. But these were always empty, their inhabitants having departed hours or sometimes minutes before arrival. It was as if humanity had returned to the shadows, content to watch from the darkness they had called home for so long. Commander Selen Voss of the Free Colonies Alliance had spent the better part of 3 years trying to establish contact with the humans. The Alliance, formed from 12 former Dominion worlds, desperately needed guidance. They were free, yes, but freedom without stability was chaos. There, whispered her navigator, pointing at the sensor display. Jump signature. Fresh. Voss leaned forward in her captain's chair. They were in the Kepler terminus, a region of space that had been marked as uninhabitable in Dominion star charts for centuries. She now suspected those charts had been deliberately falsified. Take us in, but keep our weapons powered down, she ordered. And broadcast on all frequencies. We come seeking dialogue, not conflict. What they found defied everything they thought they knew about humanity's capabilities. The human fleet that emerged from behind the gas giant was massive, larger than anything that had attacked the Dominion. Sleek vessels, their hulls bearing the scars of centuries, formed a defensive wall around what appeared to be an entire mobile civilization. Ship cities stretched for kilometers, their hulls converted into living spaces, manufacturing centers, and agricultural domes. This wasn't just a fleet, it was humanity's home, their arc through the void. A transmission crackled through the Alliance ship's communications array. Alliance vessel, you have entered sovereign human space. State your intentions. Voss stepped forward. This is Commander Selen Voss of the Free Colonies Alliance. We seek an audience with your leadership. The galaxy needs to know what comes next. There was a long pause. Then, follow the beacon. Deviate from the prescribed course and you will be destroyed. A small probe detached from the nearest human vessel, its lights blinking in a pattern that Voss's navigation computer immediately began to follow. As they drew closer to the heart of the fleet, Voss could see the true scope of humanity's survival. Tens of thousands of ships, some clearly ancient, others bearing the sleek lines of advanced technology. Children played in transparent corridors between vessels, their laughter transmitted across open channels. Gardens flourished in vast biodomes. This wasn't a military fleet. This was an entire civilization that had learned to thrive in the void. "My God," breathed her science officer. "How long have they been out here?" "Centuries," Voss whispered. "They've been building this the entire time." The human leadership met them aboard a massive vessel that served as both capital ship and cultural center. The corridors were lined with holographic displays showing the history humanity had preserved, images of Earth, of the colonies that had been destroyed, of the faces of those who had been lost. Commander Voss was escorted to a circular chamber where 5 humans sat behind a curved table. They were not the battle-hardened warriors she had expected, but individuals who carried themselves with the weight of leadership. At the center sat a woman with graying hair and intelligent eyes, Admiral Elena Vasquez, the architect of humanity's return. "Commander Voss," Admiral Vasquez said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had led her people through their darkest hour. "You seek to know what comes next. The answer is simple. Nothing." Voss frowned. "Nothing. The debt has been paid. The Dominion no longer exists. We have no interest in ruling the galaxy. We learned long ago that power corrupts, and corruption breeds the very evil we fought to destroy." "But the galaxy is in chaos," Voss protested. "Worlds are suffering. Pirates raid shipping lanes. Without leadership. Without oppression," corrected another human, a scarred man whose cybernetic eye gleamed in the chamber's soft light. "The galaxy is learning to govern itself. That is not our responsibility." Admiral Vasquez leaned forward. "Do you know what we found when we investigated the Dominion archives? Evidence of 17 separate genocides. 17 species wiped from existence because they were deemed inconvenient or threatening to Dominion rule. We were just number 18 on a very long list." The chamber fell silent. "We are not saviors, Commander Voss. We are the consequences of unchecked power. And now that justice has been served, we return to what we do best, survival." But Voss was not so easily dismissed. What if there was another way? What if the galaxy could learn from humanity's example without repeating the mistakes of the past? The human leaders exchanged glances. Admiral Vasquez raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "A confederation," Voss said, her words tumbling out in her excitement. "Not an empire, not a dominion, but a voluntary alliance. Worlds that choose to work together, to defend each other, to share resources and knowledge. No single species in control. No hegemony." "And you think this would work?" asked the scarred man. "I think it's the only thing that will work," Voss replied. "The galaxy has learned that empires fall. But maybe it can also learn that cooperation survives." Admiral Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned to her colleagues. They spoke in hushed tones, their words barely audible. Finally, she looked back at Voss. "Humanity will not lead this confederation. We will not join it as members. But—" She paused. "We will watch. And if this alliance proves itself worthy, if it truly protects the weak rather than exploiting them, then perhaps we will offer our knowledge, our technology, our experience. You would be observers. We would be guardians," corrected the Admiral. "The galaxy's immune system against tyranny. Should another dominion rise, should another species attempt genocide or subjugation, then humanity will return from the void to deliver justice." Voss felt a chill run down her spine. It was both a promise and a threat. News of the meeting spread quickly through the former Dominion space. The Free Colonies Alliance became the foundation for something larger, the Galactic Covenant, a loose confederation of worlds bound by principles rather than force. The Covenant's charter was simple: voluntary membership, mutual defense, shared resources for exploration and scientific advancement, an absolute prohibition against genocide or species-wide oppression. Any member world could leave whenever they chose. Any species could join if they accepted the Charter's principles. Most importantly, a single article was written into the Charter's very foundation, carved into the monument at the Covenant's capital on New Geneva. Should any member of this Covenant, or any force in the galaxy, attempt the extermination or systematic oppression of any sapient species, humanity shall return from the void to deliver justice. This is not a threat, it is a promise. This is not a warning, it is a fact. The Guardians watch. The Guardians remember. The Guardians never forget. The Covenant's first real test came 3 years later when the hegemony of Vorthak, a militaristic species that had remained neutral during the Dominion War, began systematically enslaving the peaceful Melari species. Vorthak battle fleets moved through Melari space, burning cities and capturing survivors for forced labor. The Covenant's response was swift but limited: economic sanctions, defensive aid to Melari refugees, and diplomatic protests. But the Vorthak were powerful, their fleets numerous, and they ignored the Covenant's demands. The slaughter continued. Then, on the anniversary of Raral Prime's fall, the Vorthak fleet besieging the Melari homeworld detected an anomaly on their sensors. Ships were appearing on the edge of the system, old ships, scarred from battle, flying the black flag of humanity. The Vorthak admiral opened a channel, his voice filled with the arrogance of a species that had never known defeat. "Human vessels, you have no authority here. Withdraw or be destroyed." The response came in that same calm, implacable tone the galaxy had learned to fear. "This is humanity. You have 48 hours to withdraw from Melari space and release all captured civilians. Failure to comply will result in your complete annihilation." The Vorthak admiral laughed. "You think your ancient fleet can match our modern warships? We are not the weak Dominion. We have studied your tactics, adapted our defenses. You cannot surprise us." "We are not here to surprise you," came the reply. "We are here to destroy you." What followed was not a battle, it was an execution. The human fleet that emerged from hyperspace was unlike anything they had fielded during the Dominion War. These ships were new, sleek, incorporating centuries of technological advancement. Their weapons didn't just penetrate Vorthak shields, they ignored them entirely. Their armor didn't just deflect Vorthak fire, it absorbed it, converting the energy to power their own systems. But more terrifying than their technology was their precision. Every shot was calculated for maximum effect. Every maneuver was designed to minimize human casualties while maximizing enemy losses. They fought not with the desperate fury of their ancestors, but with the cold efficiency of masters who had perfected their craft. The Vorthak fleet was annihilated in 4 hours. Not a single human ship was lost. The Melari were freed. The Vorthak Empire, witnessing the complete destruction of their invincible fleet, immediately sued for peace and began reparations payments that would continue for the next 50 years. And then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the humans vanished back into the void. The galaxy learned its lesson well. The Covenant grew, encompassing hundreds of worlds. Trade flourished. Scientific advancement accelerated. Art and culture bloomed in ways that had been impossible under the Dominion's rigid control. There were conflicts, of course. Border disputes, trade disagreements, political tensions. But when these arose, negotiators would meet in chambers decorated with holos of human ships, silent reminders of what happened to those who chose extinction over diplomacy. Some species grumbled about humanity's self-appointed role as galactic enforcer. They called it hypocritical, argued that humanity had simply replaced the Dominion with their own form of tyranny. But they were wrong. The Dominion had ruled through fear of what they would do. Humanity ruled through fear of what they would do if forced to act. The difference was crucial. The Dominion had demanded submission. Humanity demanded only that genocide end forever. Years passed. Decades. The galaxy prospered under the Covenant's loose governance. Children grew up learning about the Dominion only in history classes, its oppression a thing of the past. And in the depths of space, in fleets that moved like ghosts through the void, humanity watched and waited. Their long vigil continued, eternal guardians of a peace bought with blood and paid for with justice. On the 15th anniversary of the Dominion's fall, A small ceremony was held on New Geneva. Representatives from across the Covenant gathered to remember those who had died under tyranny, not just humans, but all the countless billions who had suffered under the Dominion's rule. Admiral Elena Vasquez, now in her 80s but still sharp, delivered the keynote address via hologram from her flagship somewhere in the galactic rim. "We return each year to this place," she said, her weathered face reflecting the weight of decades, "not to celebrate our victory, but to remember our purpose. Humanity did not survive extinction to become conquerors. We survived to ensure that no other species would face what we faced." She paused, looking out at the gathered delegates. "The galaxy is vast. Life is precious. And vigilance is eternal. We are the watchers in the void, the guardians of peace, the promise that genocide will never again go unanswered." As the ceremony concluded, children from dozens of species played together in the memorial gardens, their laughter echoing off monuments carved with the names of the lost. They played games of exploration and discovery, of building rather than destroying. They were the first generation to grow up truly free. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, humanity's fleet continued its endless patrol, a sword hanging over the heads of any who would dare to repeat the sins of the past. They were no longer the hunted, they were the hunters. No longer the victims, they were the victors. But most importantly, they were no longer alone. The galaxy had learned to police itself, to choose cooperation over conquest, diplomacy over destruction. And in that choice, humanity had found something they had lost centuries ago when their worlds burned. Hope. The age of reckoning was ending. The age of peace had begun. And in the depths of space, humanity watched and waited, guardians of a justice that transcended time itself, until the day their vigil would no longer be needed, and they could finally come home.